The distress beacon had been drifting for 11 years before anyone answered it, and by the time the Caelic remnant realized their mistake, it was already far too late to take it back. "Cancel the beacon," High Warden Ithral Sova hissed, watching her tactical display fill with a single contact translating out of subspace at the edge of Outpost Marn's dying orbit. "Cancel it now, before that thing gets close enough to." "It's already here, Warden," her comms officer said, voice cracking. "And it's not answering our hails, it's not answering anything." On the view screen, a single vessel resolved out of the dark. Gray, blunt, utterly without ornament, its hull scarred by 3 centuries of use and never once repaired to look prettier than it needed to. No flag, no emblem. Just 6 words stenciled along its flank in a human alphabet. Nobody in that command bunker could read, though the ship's own translation matrix rendered them a moment later across every screen in the outpost Hun's willing grave. "We answer every call, that's not a rescue ship," Ithral's chief engineer whispered. "Warden, look at the hull mass. Look at the weapons ports. That's not what we sent an SOS to." It wasn't, and it was about to become the outpost's only hope of surviving the next 6 hours. None of this had begun that way. 3 weeks earlier, Outpost Marn had been a quiet mining relay on the edge of Caelic remnant territory, home to 4,000 civilians and one badly outdated distress network that hadn't been updated since before the remnants' long war with the Voth ascendancy had ended in an uneasy, exhausted truce, when a Voth splinter fleet, renegades who had never accepted the peace, calling themselves the undefeated Cinder, arrived to seize the outpost's rare fuel deposits by force. Ithral Sova did the only thing her dying communications array allowed. She triggered every distress protocol in the system at once, an old, half-forgotten emergency measure that broadcast an SOS across every known relay network in a 100 light-year radius, indiscriminate, unfiltered, desperate. Most of those relays belonged to allies, trade partners, neutral parties who might reasonably answer a mining outpost's plea for help. One of them, buried deep in an archive nobody at Outpost Marn had checked in over a decade, belonged to a species the remnant had encountered exactly once, briefly, 4 years into an uneasy first contact that had ended so quietly, nobody had thought to update the files. Humanity. Nobody at Outpost Marn remembered that the old treaty terms included a standing mutual aid clause. Fewer still remembered that humans, when asked what would happen if that clause were ever invoked, had given an answer the remnant's diplomats found so unsettling they'd buried it in a footnote and never discussed it again. "We will come. It may not be the ship you want, it will be the ship you need." The Council had made a terrible mistake assuming that footnote was diplomatic theater. Ithral Sova had not signed that treaty. She'd inherited it, a stack of clauses nobody expected to matter, from her predecessor Warden Corvain Marn, the outpost's namesake, dead 30 years now, who had sat across a table from a human delegation 4 decades earlier, at the tail end of first contact. Unsure whether these newcomers were worth the ink of a formal alliance, Corvain had asked what humanity actually offered in exchange for trade access, expecting the usual currency of interstellar diplomacy, technology, resources, military support contingent on convenience. The delegate, an older woman named Constance Reyes Marsh, gave an answer so strange he recorded it verbatim rather than summarize it. "We don't have much you can't get cheaper elsewhere," she'd said. "No better weapons, not yet. What we have is this. If you ever call and mean it, we will come, and we will not calculate first whether it's convenient. That's the whole treaty." Corvain filed it as a curiosity. 41 years later, buried in an archive nobody had opened since his death, that promise was the only reason Outpost Marn had anyone left to evacuate at all, aboard the UNS Willing Grave. Captain Murray Okoye had been asleep for 6 hours when the century-old signal finally reached her ship's antique receiver. A relic kept running, against every modernization recommendation, specifically because someone, somewhere might one day need exactly this kind of forgotten promise honored. "Captain," her XO said, "we have a distress signal. Caelic Remnant Treaty Codes, Priority 0 Mutual Aid." Mirel sat up in the dark of her quarters, already reaching for her boots. "How old is the treaty?" 41 years, ma'am," Nobody's invoked it since it was signed, then nobody's tested whether we meant it. She was already moving. Wake the crew. Full readiness. We're not going in as guests. That wasn't even the biggest surprise waiting for the Willing Grave's crew. The Willing Grave was not, by any conventional measure, humanity's most powerful warship. She was old, older than most of her crew, a design humanity had stopped building decades ago in favor of faster, sleeker vessels with better optics and prettier hulls. What she had instead was a single design philosophy baked into every rivet. She was never meant to win a fight through superior firepower. She was built to arrive, and to keep arriving, no matter what stood between her and the people who'd called for help, until either the threat backed down or there was nothing left of the Willing Grave to stop. Her crew called her that for a reason. She'd earned the name 3 decades earlier, hauling survivors out of the Cradle Reach disaster, while her own hull breached in 4 places, refusing to break formation until the last evacuation shuttle cleared. She'd never been retired. She'd never needed to be. Some ships, humanity had learned, were worth more for what they refused to stop doing than for what they could do better than anyone else. Her crew were not elite soldiers hand-picked for glory. Half of them had transferred from decommissioned vessels rather than accept discharge. Unwilling to walk away from a ship whose entire purpose was showing up when no one else would. The undefeated Cinder's fleet commander, a Voth zealot named Skarn Ullus, who had spent 15 years refusing to accept his species' surrender, watched the Willing Grave translate into the system and laughed. One ship, he said, over an open channel meant to humiliate the outpost as much as intimidate it. The great and terrible humans send one broken relic to save 4,000 lives. Warden Sova, your allies have insulted you. Everything changed in the next few seconds. The Willing Grave did not return fire. She did not maneuver defensively. She moved with slow and utterly deliberate purpose, directly between the undefeated Cinder's lead cruiser and Outpost Marne's fragile orbital ring, and opened every external floodlight and hailing channel she had, broadcasting not a threat, but coordinates. Outpost Marne, Murray's voice carried across every frequency in the system, calm as a held breath. This is Captain Murray Okoye. United Nations ship, Willing Grave. Begin evacuation to the coordinates I'm transmitting now. We will hold this position for as long as it takes. Hold it with what? Skarn Ullus sneered. One ship cannot withstand fleet. You're right, Mirel said. One ship can't. But I didn't come here to withstand you, Commander. I came here to outlast you. There's a difference, and you're about to learn it the hard way. Skarn ordered his fleet to open fire, expecting the old human vessel to buckle within the first exchange. What his sensors reported back instead stunned his own bridge crew into silence. The Willing Grave's hull, ancient as it was, had been reinforced across 3 centuries of continuous service, with layer after layer of adaptive plating, each generation of engineers adding just enough to keep her standing exactly 1 fight, longer than anyone expected her to survive. She took the barrage. She did not move. Nobody knew what the human captain was hiding behind that calm voice, until the second wave of Cinder fighters broke formation to flank the outpost's evacuation shuttles directly, at which point every gunport on the Willing Grave flank opened at once, not toward Skarn's cruisers, but toward the fighters threatening unarmed civilians, precise, restrained, devastatingly efficient. Not a single evacuation shuttle was lost. She's not fighting to win, Ithral Sova whispered, watching from the outpost's command bunker as her people streamed toward the transports. She's fighting so we can leave. Skarn Ullus, watching his fighter wings scatter, felt something crack in his certainty for the first time in 15 years of unbroken zealotry. Bring every remaining ship in on her position, he ordered. Overwhelm her, now. The Queen suddenly froze. Not a queen, but Warden Ithral Sova, standing in her command bunker 3 hours later, watching the Willing Grave's hull integrity readout fall past the halfway mark, then past a third, then further still, while the evacuation transports kept climbing away from Outpost Marne one by one. She understood, with sudden and terrible clarity, that the ship holding that line intended to keep holding it, long after logic said she should withdraw. Tell them to fall back, Ithral said. Tell the humans to retreat. We have enough shuttles clear. They don't need to. Warden, her comms officer interrupted, voice hollow. The willing grave just broadcast something. To us, not to the enemy. It was a single line, repeated on a loop across every channel the outpost still had. We answer every call, all the way through. Get your people home. The truth stunned the entire remnant fleet reinforcements when they arrived 4 hours later. Not because they found a battle won, but because they found the willing grave. Still there. Scarred nearly to the hull frame, 3 of her 6 engines dark, still holding position between the wreckage of Skarnoflus's shattered fleet and an outpost that had finished its evacuation 40 minutes earlier, and had nowhere left to run. Skarn Olis himself had not survived the final exchange, his flagship broken apart trying to punch through a defense that simply refused, again and again, to yield the space it had claimed. His second-in-command, a younger Voth officer named Threl Kasik, who had spent the entire battle watching an old, unglamorous human warship absorb wave after wave rather than abandon 4,000 strangers, surrendered the remnants of the Cinder Fleet without being asked twice. "Why didn't you leave?" Threl asked, when remnant forces finally boarded the willing grave to render aid. Finding her corridors scorched, her crew exhausted, Captain Bramante-Achebe standing on a bridge, held together by emergency bracing and stubbornness. Your own command would have permitted a tactical withdrawal hours ago. No one would have blamed you. Morel considered the question, the way a person considers something they've never had to explain before, because the answer had always simply been obvious. We told a colony 41 years ago that if they ever called, we'd come, she said. Doesn't matter if the treaty was old or forgotten, or if we were sleeping when the signal came in. A promise doesn't get quieter just because nobody's tested it in a while. It just waits. Warden Ithral Sova, standing in the wreckage of her own command bunker, would later say that the moment she understood humanity was the moment she watched the willing grave's crew, half of them wounded, refuse medical evacuation until every single outpost Marne civilian had been accounted for first. The Kailic remnant rewrote its treaty archives within the month, moving humanity's mutual aid clause from a forgotten footnote to the very first page of every alliance document it possessed. Not because humans had the deadliest warship in known space, because they had proven, at terrible cost, that they had the most dangerous thing any species could offer another. A promise they intended to keep, long after everyone else had forgotten it was ever made. 6 months later, the willing grave limped into a remnant shipyard for repairs, held together as much by stubbornness as by scaffolding. Warden Ithral Sova came in person, expecting a hero's welcome underway. Instead she found Captain Bramante-Achebe alone on an observation deck, watching engineers crawl across scarred plating, saying nothing. "You could have died," Ithral said. "For a treaty you never signed, a promise made before your crew was born." "That's exactly why we had to keep it," Morel said. "A promise only means something when it costs the person keeping it. If it's easy, it's just convenience wearing nicer words." So instead Ithral did something no remnant warden had done for an outsider in living memory. She ordered Outpost Marne's own survivors to help rebuild the willing grave, alongside her crew, until the old warship carried remnant alloy welded beside 3 centuries of human steel. "So the next time someone doubts what that ship is willing to do," Ithral said, "she'll carry proof from both our peoples that the answer is everything." Word of Outpost Marne, spread across a dozen systems, told to remnant children before sleep. The gray ship with no ornament that came when nobody expected it to, and stayed when everyone expected it to run. Skeptics who'd never trusted humanity's unglamorous promises found themselves rereading their own dusty treaties, wondering whether they'd been wrong to assume such promises would never be tested. They had been. And humanity had answered anyway.